This is like the biggest change, I think, since they said the post-Civil War in America, the biggest religious change. About 15% of American adults living today, so that's about 40 million people in America, have stopped going to church over the last 25 years. As they were kind of looking through why people left and what type of people left, they found that dechurching is not from one group. So it's not just Republicans or conservatives, it's liberals and Democrats as well. This is something that affects everybody. Are we live?
Yeah,
we're live.
So, yeah.
We're live. Hey, everybody.
We got somebody watching us.
Welcome to the Pastor's Circle. We're talking about running shoes.
Yeah.
If you'd like to talk about running shoes, I could talk all day about that. We are excited to speak with you today about an issue that's just huge for the church right now. It's a dechurching, people leaving the church. And I feel like this has been accentuated since COVID-19. But as we'll talk about, this is a problem that's been huge for the last 25 years. And we're just now seeing kind of the fruits of it in a bad way. So we're going to talk about that. My name is Wade Bearden. Work at Ministry Pass, one of the co-founders of Seminary. I'm also a teaching pastor at my church and an author of a couple of books, and excited to share with you a book, not a book I wrote, but a book that I really think that you should read. We'll talk about that here in a minute. And I'm joined by these other two guys.
Yeah, so Justin Trapp, for those of you that don't know me, I'm the founder of Ministry Pass. And then David Krause to my right here, your left if you're watching. Yeah. David, we made an announcement today.
We did. Yeah. It's a pretty cool one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to tell them about?
Yeah, just before COVID, you and I think, were brainstorming years ago about this idea of the church not tapping into the power of a marketing funnel to, just build community and trust with their community, really.
Old office, right?
Yeah, just a long time, a decade or so ago. No, just kidding. But we were talking about this idea, and then I started researching and planning and thinking through how we could build something like that. It wasn't on your radar to build it just yet, so I launched churchly.com before the pandemic. Churchly.com was a website builder and then a marketing funnel library, a communication tool just to help churches grow healthy communities and grow their church on autopilot, really. So started it, and it's been a fun ride. Out the gate, when the pandemic started, the churches were like, oh no, we need a website.
Yeah,
we need a new website. So there was a mad dash to the finish line. One of those was actually really cool. Ed Stetzer joined right out the gate. A friend of mine was his marketing director, so he turned him on to Churchly.
Yeah.
And we built a coronavirusinthechurch.com site overnight and launched the next day. Him and Rick Warren partnered together.
Coronavirus. I've not heard that.
Coronavirus, the whole word, and the church. Yeah. So how to teach leading churches, helping them navigate coronavirus and pandemic stuff and still lead a church and, have a healthy community. So that was really cool to get to build. And we've got churches all over the United States on the platform, which is super cool to see. But it was a one-man band. Can only do so much as one guy. Yeah. And so it's been really cool. We partnered together, and I already kind of worked with Ministry Pass, and now I get to still lead Churchly inside of Ministry Pass, which is honoring.
And what I love so much about Churchly is, I know we're not talking about Churchly, so this is like a pitch, but I love so much about Churchly is it is easy to get your website up. So our promise is like a new church website in 3 weeks.
Or less.
You don't have to do anything.
Don't lift a finger.
Yeah, we'll do it.
And we'll do it all in 3 weeks, because the thought, like if I was the senior pastor of a church, I'm just a teaching pastor. If I was the senior pastor or lead pastor, the idea of creating a new website, I'm like, this is horrible. But we can do it in 3 weeks, and so or less. Or less
is the key.
So we made that announcement, and so churchly.com. I want to jump into our discussion, and today we're actually talking about a book called The Great Dechurching. It was written by Jim Davis and Michael Graham. So Jim Davis, he's a pastor at a church in Orlando. Michael Graham, he's a writer, and he does a lot of things for the Gospel Coalition. And they wrote this book. It was kind of a big deal last year. I feel like a lot of people were talking about it. And it's called The Great Dechurching. Who's leaving? Why are they going? And what will it take to bring them back? This is so good. So I like to read. I like to read a lot of books. And periodically at the end of the year, I'll say something like, this is a book every pastor should read. Usually there's one or two maybe that I'll read. And this is the one that if I could choose out of all the 50 books I read last year for every pastor in America to read, I think it would be this one right here. Really great. And fun fact, I know Michael Graham a little bit, one of the authors. Okay. We teamed up a few years ago. This is a funny story. Remember the documentary Making a Murderer?
Yeah.
We teamed up a few years ago and we interviewed the lawyer who defended, I forget his name now, but the guy who was convicted. Okay. And we interviewed him.
Because you had a film critic podcast.
Yeah. And Michael kind of set up the interview and we interviewed him together. And it was an article on christandpopculture.com. So it was really interesting. But Michael's a good guy.
Is he guilty?
Is he guilty? He was convicted.
Okay.
You kind of do what you will, right? Michael's a good guy. So here's what we're going to share some statistics from the book. Obviously, we don't have any like handouts or slides for you who are watching or listening. And the reason for that is there's just kind of a lot. And I want you to buy this book. So listen to this, get some nuggets, and then go buy it. I'm also going to be giving away, let's give away like 4 copies. Let's do 5 copies of the book. And so wherever you're listening to this, if you're listening to it on a Facebook link, if you're listening to this on YouTube, because it's going to be on YouTube, just comment. It could be anything. It could be an observation. It could just be a comment that says, I want this book. And what we're going to do is we're going to go back here in a little bit. We're going to give it a couple days and we are going to choose 5 people and we'll send them this book. Nice. So it's going to be good. So as we're kind of thinking through, guys, and we're going to just let the conversation go where it needs to go. But as they were kind of looking at this topic of dechurching, they partnered with a couple of political scientists. And they surveyed around 7,000 people who have left the church and essentially asked them a lot of different questions about why they left the church and if they would be willing to go back. And Graham and Davis, they describe or they define a dechurched person as someone who used to go to church at least once a month. Okay, so it's not, hey, they used to go to church every week and now they go once a month, but it's someone who went at least once a month, but now goes less than once a year. So this is someone who doesn't even show up
on Easter
and Christmas.
I was going to say, we've got a lot of dechurched people in our church then that show up once a month. But no, it's once a month.
They used to go once a month,
but now less
than once a year. So these are people that are really kind of completely out.
Disconnected themselves.
About 15% of American adults living today, so that's about 40 million people in America, have stopped going to church over the last 25 years. It isn't, that's just crazy to me. 25%, or 15% have stopped going to church over the last 25 years. And as they were kind of looking through why people left and what type of people left, they found that dechurching is not from one group. So it's not just, all the people that are dechurching are from a Catholic church or even evangelical churches. It's every single tradition
across the board.
It's every single political affiliation. So it's not just Republicans or conservatives. It's liberals and Democrats as well. Locations, genders, traditions. So this is something that affects everybody.
Yeah.
And for the pastors that are listening, I think we probably don't even need to kind of tell you that because you've seen that in your own church. You've seen people leaving your church. And what they've done is they've actually used models, computer learning models, even with AI involved, to kind of create certain subsections of people who have left the church. And so what I love about this book is they don't just say, here are the reasons why people left the church, but here are the different types of people who have left the church. And it helps us to kind of drill down. Because if you get online, if you go to an internet like message board, there are a lot of different people saying that they left the church, and it can be easy to define people who've left the church in one particular arena. But they're like, hey, there's a lot of different groups. And so they have different categories. So we've got dechurched mainline Christians and Roman Catholic Christians. But then they took evangelicals and they kind of broke them down into 4 categories. The computer learning models did. So we'll talk about that. But cultural Christians, dechurched mainstream evangelicals, ex-evangelicals, and dechurched BIPOC, so Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So those are the kind of the four different groups. Have you guys noticed this in your church? So David, you are the worship leader at your church. Have you kind of noticed this trend, kind of a moving away from church? I know in my context, seeing a lot of the people that I grew up with, and even a lot of people that were in my youth group when I was youth pastor, have just kind of moved away. And it just feels like there's this different shift in traditions and attendance patterns.
Yeah, of course. Obviously, COVID played a role in some of that. I think we'll get to that a little bit later, but we saw a lot of people not come back after COVID. And it's interesting. I think they would still identify as a Christ follower, but they're not connected with a local body anywhere, which I find fascinating. And then, we've got the handful of people that pop in, you'll see them once a month, twice a month, maybe if you're lucky. And they would say that they're part of the church, but they're just not plugged in. But it's a trend I don't want to see grow.
Yeah. Well,
how can we connect people, back to the body?
What Davis and Michael, what they argue is that it has to slow down.
Sure.
Yeah.
Because we're running out of people.
Yeah.
Like, so at some point it's going to slow down, but this is like the biggest change, I think, since they said the post-Civil War in America, the biggest religious change. And so it has to slow down at some point.
I think anecdotally for me, so my experiences don't necessarily represent the findings in the book. It's just like one, percentage of the reasons they identify in the book. But I sort of grew up as like professional church goer, if you will. Like I've been going to church multiple times a week since I was like, 3 years old. And then I was wanting to be in ministry from the time I was 11. So a lot of my experiences are sort of an outlier experiences. And the people that I know that sort of dechurched or don't go to church at least very often anymore, a lot of it has to do with like relationships essentially. And they don't really have a problem with God. They say they love Jesus, but it all comes back to some sort of people wronged them or the church wronged them.
Sure.
The step. Like I went to a garage sale one time and it was down the street from my house, and my wife wanted to stop because they had this beautiful, you would have loved it. It's beautiful, like tall, like 10-foot antique looking door thing. Oh, yeah. And it was awesome. So we stopped. She's like, no, we got to go check it out. So I go there and they got a bunch of, the little half of his junk, right? You go to garage sales.
Knickknacks.
Yeah.
And I found this bin, and this guy was selling all of his Bibles, which is fine. People have Bibles.
Extra.
Yeah. They've got a lot. But he had commentaries. And so I'm going, okay, he's got New Testament survey, Old Testament survey. And so I just strike up a conversation. And we actually went to the same theological seminary, Southwestern. Now it's called
Nelson
University. Willie Nelson University.
And so I asked him, and he basically had some church hurt. He went to Southwestern, got a degree, went into children's ministry, and then had just a horrific experience with the lead pastor there.
Wow.
And ended up burning out. And I asked him where they went to church. He said, we don't go to church. And he has like 3 kids that are, 2 of them are teenagers. And I'm going, man, they've spent a decade or more out of church. Yeah, out of church. And he was a minister. I have another friend of mine who was a worship leader, and I feel like it always comes down to this. Like, you ever, especially before we had kids, right? You'd see some kid just causing a ruckus in the grocery store, and pre-kids for certain. Post-kids, you
get a little judgy.
Yeah, you get a little judgy.
Like whenever I'm a parent, I'll never let my kid touch a screen.
Yeah.
They won't watch TV.
They won't ever have an iPad at the restaurant. So this kid is just throwing a fit or something, and in your head you're like judging the parent based on the kid's behavior. Like, man, get your kid together. Now I have 3 boys, and my middle son is autistic, so like we go to the grocery store and he licks everything he can touch. He's just pulling green bean cans off the shelf and just licking it and putting it back, and I'm like, please stop.
Oh, man.
So I understand, but I think
a little more empathy.
Yeah, at least my experience, I've seen that people will judge the parents or judge the father based on the behavior of the children.
Sure.
And so they will allow, whether it be a pastor or a ministry friend or a church friend or someone in their small group, they will allow that relational experience to taint their relationship or their commitment to, fellowshipping and going to church. So at least for anecdotally, now I think my case is a little bit unique in the fact that I've just been in church so much.
I mean, it is fascinating because the statistics essentially back it up. There is this aspect of community, like, oh, I just moved to another church, or in America, life is different. We don't emphasize those community bonds. Our schedules are different. And as a result, there's just the whole thing. But then there's also this large section of people who move on because of hypocrisy. And we're starting to see that trend in those statistics more and more. And so there definitely has to be the church has to address it in a way, right? So the first group, and what I love too about all of this is that as you heard from Justin and from David and their stories, there's not one group of people or one instance why people leave the church. There's kind of a lot, and some of it kind of just all mixes together for some people. The first group that the book describes is what they call cultural Christians, and so this AI learning model kind of created this group. Because they saw trends together. So these people were all kind of like together on this trend. And cultural Christians, this group represents 52% of all dechurched evangelicals. So half of the evangelicals that have left are in this group. Wow. What is fascinating about the way the AI model kind of put this together is that only 1% of these individuals said they embraced the truth that Jesus is the Son of God. So just 1%. And 22% believe the Bible is the literal word of God. So this is really fascinating. So half the people are leaving the church, and they're not all leaving for doctrinal reasons, but they're leaving and they don't actually believe or maybe even know about Christian theology. So let me give you a couple of reasons why they left. So 18% of them left because my friends weren't attending. Okay, so that's like a quick thing, right? It's I didn't have a problem necessarily. 18%, and you can check different reasons for this. Attending, 18% left because attending was inconvenient. So it goes back to American life and all this. 17% left because suffering changed my view of God. Which seems like a really ripe opportunity. Are we talking about, how do we talk about suffering?
Teaching about.
Do we talk about suffering it happens and God is still good and we address that? Or
there's a lot of suffering in the Bible.
Right? Or is it one of those things where we talk so much about the benefits of Christianity that when people suffer, they're like, oh, well, Christianity doesn't work.
This can't line up.
17% said I wanted to express my gender identity. 17% said I moved to a new community. 16% said too restrictive of my sexual freedom. 16% said a scandal involving clergy encouraged them to leave. 16% said I chose to worship completely online. So there's a kind of a lot of different reasons. I think the first thing that sticks out is
the people that said that completely online are lying.
Yeah, right. How often?
I just absolutely love the online church experience. Yeah. It's my go-to.
Oh, yeah.
So as I'm thinking about all of this, it's like, okay, we need to do a better job of connecting people in the community. I was talking to a friend this week, and he's like, I attended this pretty big church for a whole year, and I never met anybody. Now, I think maybe some pastors would say, well, is that him not reaching out? Possibly. But also we make so much of this of church the Sunday morning experience. It's a tentpole event, You just come, you get your fill. Yep. So there definitely seems to be some low-hanging fruit. Here's what's really cool. Excuse me. Only 3% of these people said that they would never return to church. So 97% of all these cultural Christians, despite not believing Jesus is the Son of God, despite having these problems, 97% said they'd be open to coming back to church. So sad news, but also like hope.
Yeah.
Hope
a lot of potential, right? Because when we were thinking through the idea of dechurching, my immediate thought was, okay, people that don't go to church anymore, were they plugged into community? Were they rooted? Were they serving? Do they have a personal relationship with Jesus, like truly? Or are these like the seed that's laid on the concrete, and they easily get, something comes along, life comes along, this doesn't line up with, this isn't convenient anymore, I'm just not going. Any number of shallow reasons.
Yeah.
So a lot of potential for the church to just step up the game, right? As far as discipling and grafting people in and connecting people, loving on people, discipling people.
Yeah. And I think it could also be, we are in Houston, right? So there's a mega church, it seems like, on every, like as many mega churches as there are Starbucks.
Yep.
And when we transitioned out of vocational ministry, there was a short season where we were just like, hey, let's just go visit some churches. And I think we visited like 11 churches, and it's like wild. And because a lot of the churches were larger, it was like really hard to connect. So I do see that, right? I do see that tension there. I wonder if you're a person and you move, like, let's say you're in Atlanta and you move to somewhere like rural Tennessee. There's not as many options. Probably the options are a lot smaller. And so how does that impact your, involvement or your church attendance?
But I will say this too, though. If you are a pastor of a small church, and I would imagine most of the pastors listening to this, small church, because that's most of the churches in America, you have a really cool opportunity, because if one random new person shows up to a church that's 3,000 in size, people might not notice.
No, definitely not.
If someone shows up new to your church, people notice.
Yeah.
So like you have that unique opportunity to actually get them involved. But I've heard a lot of pastors talking about community and this and that, but never really giving their people the tools to do that. It's like go to small groups, but it's always based on the visitor has to make a move.
Yeah.
And I obviously that has to happen, but are you teaching your people to make that move first? So that's important. The next group of people is dechurched mainstream evangelicals. So these are people mostly that would say they have a committed relationship with Jesus. They have orthodox beliefs. 22% said they left church because they moved to a new community. 16% said attending was inconvenient. 15 said divorce, remarriage, or another family change caused them to leave the church. 15% said COVID-19 got me out of the habit. 14% said I didn't fit in with the congregation. And 12% said I didn't experience much love from the congregation. 100% of these people said they were willing to return to an evangelical church.
Wow.
But that's really, I would say, kind of low-hanging fruit. All of these people are willing to return. It seems like to me, if someone would just invite them, they would come back. And
my dad says that all the time. You find is here, shepherds don't beget sheep, sheep beget sheep. And it's the sheep's job to go out and like show love to people, right? And show someone love, invite them to church, and then probably just show up Sundays. You be my pew buddy. I got your seat,
We were really good at doing that when you're like teenagers, right? Like, hey, like if you come with me to the youth, they're doing like free pizza.
Yeah, free pizza.
Yeah, like free food, right? But like adults, we're not as good at inviting our friends as we were when we were kids.
No.
I mean, this is so ripe. These people believe Christian beliefs.
Yeah.
They left because things were inconvenient or this or that. Really, if people would just invite them, they'd be willing to return. I mean, it's pretty wild. Yeah. The next group is ex-evangelicals. We hear a lot about that group. But what's fascinating is in terms of political involvement and online activity, this group you would think would be the highest because we always hear about ex-evangelicals, but they're actually the lowest in terms of political involvement and activity online. As it just goes to show you that this general idea is not always true. Every person is different. 23% left because they didn't fit in with the congregation. 21% left because they moved to a new community. 18% said I didn't experience much love with a congregation. 18% said attending was inconvenient. 15% said negative experiences in an evangelical church. So there's kind of more to it, and you can read it in the book. But it's kind of some of the same things. It's like I didn't get connected, or something happened in my life that took me out of church.
Well, what's interesting is like I'm not. I don't have all of those percentages memorized, but a lot of like the pastoral scandal or something really, really negative happening doesn't seem to be a majority like you would think. If you see some Twitter thread or X thread, someone's like, oh, here's this pastor failed. This is the reason why people are not coming to church. And that's not the case according to the book.
Yeah, there is those reasons involved.
They are, but they're like real small.
Yeah, but it's as you kind of go down, it's a sizable percentage, but with a lot of these groups, it's not the number one. It's I didn't fit in with the congregation. Yes. And so that's super important.
My friends aren't going.
My friends aren't going, and so if we just encouraged our people to invite other individuals, and we worked on showing more love in our congregations, it would actually just change a lot. And obviously, kind of this general perception of pastors falling and being hypocritical contributes to it. So it is a sizable percentage, but it's not everyone. Not everyone has left because of that.
Do you think that's like the easy go-to excuse? Because that's like the lowest hanging fruit from like an excuse standpoint.
You get to blame someone else.
Yeah, you get to blame someone else. It's not about me. It's about them. Like,
I think it's hard, right? Okay, so I have people in my life who've left the church, and they've had some pretty bad experiences with church growing up. Things that not just I've heard, but I've witnessed, right?
Yeah.
And so it almost feels like there is this trauma involved, this frustration, this hurt, and it's all kind of wrapped up in their belief in God. And so you can't just pull out belief in God and just say, oh, well, ignore all these other Christians because they go to church and someone might pray for them, and it reminds them of when someone tried to cast a demon out of them for no reason. Things like that.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to always separate that. It really is. And so we have to be empathetic and like look at the long term. But I mean, I think there's probably also people who are don't want to go back to church or don't want that responsibility, and so they might just use that. But I don't think we can discount it.
I have a funny, I don't know, it's not funny, it's sad, but it's a little bit of a colorful story. Our church was like, hey, invite your friends. So our church was actually encouraging us, invite your friends.
When you were a teenager, right?
When I was a teenager. This is a great time to bring your friends to church.
Oh.
And so I invited my friend, and we used to play basketball every day. We played basketball every day for years, maybe 3 summers, 6 hours a day. It was just nothing but basketball. And he would come ever so often, but he would only come to the Friday night. I think they called it Friday Night Riot, if I remember correctly. And it was just,
Riot.
Yeah, it was more like,
I feel like youth group back in the day, all the names were like dangerous.
Yeah,
it's like come to Explosion Youth, Riot.
Right.
If your parents don't grow up in church, they're like, what is happening at this place?
yes,
A
Going to a riot?
powerhouse.
Yeah.
And so they were like, he would always come with me on Friday nights, which was pizza and basketball. Okay. But he would never come to the service. And our youth pastor's like, bring them to this service, your lost friends. So I brought him, and he came. Uh-oh. And it was an evangelist from Dallas who did a let's get filled with the Spirit and speak in tongues night.
Oh, no.
And so there was people laying out and a lot of tongue speaking, and it was a wild. I gotta be honest, it was like a wild night for a youth service for me,
for first time.
Yeah, for a church person.
For me,
yeah.
And his eyes were so big, and he looked terrified, just terrified.
Yeah.
And then my mom's asking him on the way home, like, "Hey, did you speak in tongues?" I'm like, "Mom, like, he has no relationship with God. Like, what are you talking about?" Like, and he like. That was the turning point in our relationship. we would play basketball every now and then, but it freaked him out so much that it sort of severed our friendship in a way. He would still say we were friends, but it was like, he's not available to play basketball. He's doing some homework all of a sudden. Yeah. And before that, we played hours a day together. And so that's, he would fit into there somewhere.
You're like, my friend's name was Joel Osteen. And no. I think all these things you've got to keep in mind. The last group of people is the BIPOC, BIPOC. So Black, Indigenous, and people of color. And what's interesting about the book is they didn't say, hey, group these individuals together. The computer machine learning system grouped them together. They did not know their race or nationality. And then they came back and looked and realized, wow, these people are BIPOC. And so it kind of goes to show you that different groups and different subsets might have different reasonings for attending or not attending church. This is probably the smallest group. So 14% of those people who've left evangelical churches, but represent about 2 million people. A couple of reasons. 19%, I struggled to fit in or belong in church. 13%, my life got really busy and I had other priorities. 12%, I had bad experiences in church. 12%, college education caused me to question my faith. 11%, there were a lack of people my age that I connected with. And 11%, I had some bad experiences with evangelicals. There are other reasons to look into, but as we were thinking through just all of this, we're kind of seeing some trends here. We're seeing hypocrisy. We're also seeing lack of connection. So that's another group. And then you also have dechurched mainline Protestants and Catholics. So they kind of put these together. And I would encourage you to look at that. But 25% of people who've left mainline church left because they moved to a new community, which is fascinating. And 16% who left Catholic churches said, I had other priorities for my time and money, which was the highest percent in terms of leaving. Politics does play a part. So for Catholics, 15% said they disagree with the politics of the congregation. We also see that a little bit in which group here? In the ex-evangelicals, 15% said I disagreed with the politics of the congregation. And I disagreed with the politics of the clergy was 13%. So we also see politics playing a big part in this and the way that we talk about politics. And I mean, I've been at churches where I've wondered, hey, are these people going to get docked and not be able to be a nonprofit anymore because of the way they're talking about certain candidates?
Yeah.
And so we definitely see that. Dechurched mainline and Catholic individuals in particular have an interest in doing tangible good in the community. So it's another thing. Are you doing good in the community? Do they just feel like you're there and it's all about the service, or do they feel like you're actually contributing to the good of the people? A couple of tidbits, interesting notes. In every tradition, okay, there's this general idea that, oh man, your kids go to college, they lose their faith. In every tradition, the more education people have, the more likely they are to stay in church. So all of these groups, higher education, more likely to stay.
How interesting.
Americans who make less money are more likely to dechurch than those who make more money. So people who have more.
What do you think that is?
I don't know. I'm not sure if part of it is working more.
Yeah, they have to.
I do know in certain congregations there is a priority given to the biggest givers. Like they're the ones that get the time on the schedule. So I don't know. Those are just observations, but little tidbits.
What do you mean time on the schedule?
Well, I think as churches, you've got a budget. You've got a budget to make, and you know who gives more than anything else. You know who's going to give to this project or that project. So who are you going to have a priority with?
Yeah, prioritize.
Are you going to make a priority to reach out to the person who gives $100,000 every year?
Yep.
over the person who gives $200 every. So maybe that's just a thought. I don't know if that's true, and that's certainly not anything they talk about in the book. So dechurched evangelicals, 28% would come back if they made new friends. If they move and they want to make new friends, 18% would come back. If they're lonely, 20% would come back. And if their children want to go, 16% said they would come back. So a lot of different reasons, just kind of coming to a close on the book. There's this point that the authors make, and they say that the emphasis in the 20th century was largely about the gospel being true. So it was like whether it was true or not. Mm-hmm. This made sense in the Western world, the questions of modernity. But they say, quote, over the last 50 years, it appears fewer people are asking, is Jesus true? And more are asking, is Jesus good? And is Jesus beautiful? So when they come to your church, are you just saying, hey, here's how Jesus is true? Or are you saying, hey, we're living according to the ways of Jesus. And the people say, oh, this is good. This is beautiful. So it really goes against, are we doing tangible good? Are we reaching out to people? Many who de-church between the ages of 15 and 25 don't feel comfortable admitting doubts or asking their most pressing questions in the church. I think there are a lot of churches because of, there are topics like sexuality and, all these topics. Churches don't want to address them because it causes controversy.
Sure.
Yeah.
But these people are saying the church is not asking or
they need that opportunity.
Questions.
Don't we have a sermon series on Ministry Pass that sort of facilitates, was it FAQs?
We have a number of FAQ series.
Yeah, that facilitates the pastor or the church being able to
address hard topics.
Yeah, address hard topics or solicit questions.
Yeah. So a lot of different ways that I think we could help with this this epidemic in America. And we've discussed a lot of them. We'd love to hear more from you about why you think people have left your church and what your church can do about it. But it's going to take work. It's going to take change and thoughtfulness. And that's not always easy. But I think this book kind of gives some ideas. So the first part is statistics. Second part is some possible solutions and answers. And we've discussed some of those, but hopefully be a great resource to you. Make sure you comment. I'm going to give 5 people this book and let us know your thoughts on the topic and what you've seen over the course of your experience in church.
I feel like we could spend a whole time together on like one reason.
Yeah, we could.
Resources, talking about how do we love people? How do we see them where they? How do we develop community? How do we disciple people? Mm-hmm. Man, a lot of reasons and a lot of opportunity for churches to just step up their game.
Yeah,
simple stuff.
Well, even as we were talking, I was actually, maybe it's because we started the conversation talking about churchly, but in my mind, I was thinking through, we were talking about how churches, largely these tentpole events, right? And so people are leaving because they don't feel connected or their friends don't go. And we're asking people to come to the big tentpole event, the big service, and we're not necessarily adding value or being sticky enough throughout the week in people's lives. And so something that Churchly does that's amazing, it's not just a beautiful church website. We have the ability for you to offer people resources on your site and then send them follow-ups that really foster and nurture that relationship with a church so that they can become a regular attender, so they can deepen their faith, so they can sign up to get baptized for the first time in their life. All of these things, Churchly is not just a website builder, but it offers so much more where the church can connect and reach people that they haven't been reaching, that are there, that clearly are open to coming back. Yeah. But we've got to utilize some of the methods.
Yeah, utilize some technology.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And how do you get people together and maybe there's a way to utilize technology so that you can connect people in your church to where they can generate friendships. And it's weird because friendships are things that kind of happen in a natural way. Sure. And so as a pastor, you're kind of in this position where I need to push that along, but I also can't make it happen on my own.
Yeah. We encourage people at our church. We say it almost weekly in our morning kind of huddles in larger circle of love. Like, don't just sit next and talk to the people you talk to every week. Go across the room, get to know other people in our church, show love to other people. Break out of your comfort. It's really comfortable to just talk to this guy every Sunday,
Right.
because it's safe.
Yeah.
But what if you opened yourself up to someone else and showed love, and then they felt connected, and it's just,
And take that outside the bounds of the church. You know, don't just say hello and talk to them, but also like plan meals together. And I think that's, it's so important. So thanks for listening. And we'd love to get your thoughts on this. We are going to pause for a minute, and if there's any questions, you can go ahead and throw them out there. I don't know if there are any questions right now.
We have some viewers,
We've got some viewers. So if you have any questions, we'll kind of like cut it right here and put this on YouTube. But since we're going live on Facebook right now, we can do whatever we want. So if you have any questions or comments, let us know. And I'm really big too on just teaching good theology as well. You have people leaving the church that really don't know what Christianity is. And so I think pastors have to be willing to go deep. I heard one pastor say, hey, wait, people don't really care about theology. They just care about things being practical. And in some ways, I think the answer is yes, people want to go to church and they want answers to what they're going through. But they do have these misconceptions or understandings about God that need to be deepened. And I think people generally want that.
I think the problem is that the problem people would have with theology is that they've been talked over.
Yeah.
And not it made a practical thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do I apply a theology? Well, I can apply a theology. Yeah, you can. It's very practical. It's very real. But having someone that can stand in front of them and do that, that's important.
Yeah. There's a good book called Delighting in the Trinity by Michael Reeves. And it's so good, where he talks about the doctrine of the Trinity, but he talks about it in a way that's easy to understand and how it applies to our life. I think if more pastors can kind of harness that to where like, hey, today we're talking about the Trinity, and it's and that's it.
And instead of pulling out of an egg,
right,
like we actually go
the egg
deeper.
But then we talk about how does it apply to your life? You know, like how God didn't need to create us. He could love before we were there because of the Trinity. And yet he created us out of love. Like, what does that mean for our lives? And so if we don't have any questions, we'll go ahead and move on. So thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time here on the Pastor Circle. And if you want to comment or add something there, we'll go ahead and we'll give away this book to a couple of people.